Hi, I'm Kenneth Tucker, and I'm presenting my individual article titled The Dilemma of Grades: Reconciling Disappointing Grades with Feelings of Personal Success by Matthew Sanders and Sky Anderson. So I wanted to start off with a quote from the article that I felt captures the essence of the research study. It says, "Grades pose a dilemma for students. Grades are prototypical measures of academic success, but often they do not adequately depict student learning or classroom success." In the graphic you see here, in a humorous fashion, we can see that complaining about grades or thinking about the negative aspects of grades for a student can lead to a series of negative consequences, not only for the student, but also for the professor as well. So let's look at the research problem. In this study, the research problem was to examine exactly how students reconcile disappointing grades with feelings of personal success. The general findings are as follows. When students feel their grades do not accurately reflect their learning, they attempt to reconcile that dilemma. In other words, it's natural to either assign blame or find a solution, but the process starts after internalizing the problem. To reconcile this dilemma, students draw on positive communication to describe their success. They do this by talking to parents, peers, and professors about their grades in a process of self-improvement. Finally, students reconcile disappointing grades with feelings of personal success by talking about personal growth and the value of genuine learning. The initial reaction of these focus group interviews was to question the validity and usefulness of the grades themselves. Afterwards, however, they began to hold conversations of self-inquiry and discovery about why their grades had not reached the golden standard of an A, and how important that actually is compared to genuine learning. So the research study was a qualitative study. It was a series of focus group interviews conducted on 45 undergraduate students in the Intermountain West. This is a location, geographic location between the Rocky, Cascade, and Sierra Nevada mountain ranges out in the western part of the United States. I'm assuming that the actual schools were not listed in the study because they did not want to reveal that information and violate any ethics considerations in the study. The inductive framework of grounded theory was used in this particular study. So the inductive framework approach is when a researcher makes specific observations or measures, looks for similar patterns, and then formulates a hypothesis prior to developing a conclusion. So the hypothesis is actually developed within the process instead of at the beginning of the process, like in a quantitative study. The grounded theory portion of this framework is a methodology for developing theory that is dependent upon gathering and analyzing data in a systematic fashion. So in this particular example, you would take the analysis of the interview recordings, the transcripts, the notes, etc. And while you're in the study process, then you're actually developing your theory. The specific findings of this study: number one is that students who were disappointed with their grades did communicate this with others, as mentioned in the previous slide. Another specific finding was that students indicated the willingness to develop their character through hard work. So they actually acknowledged that maybe there's some things they could do on their end to actually bring their grades up. Finally, students acknowledged that genuine learning is more important than a grade. So they actually shone the spotlight on themselves instead of their actual academic grade in the process of learning. The author suggests that future research should examine the use of positive discourse in teacher-student communication about grades. Future studies should actually focus on the positive aspects of communication instead of the negative aspects of communication. They also suggest that theoretical and practical models of positive discourse should be developed so that we can have some guidelines about how actually this process should take place. These researchers did not actually suggest anything specific, but just emphasize the outcome of positive communication versus negative communication. So we'll pause right here for some key takeaways from this research study. Number one, students experience frustration when grades are the only measure of success. Also, they are not completely private. So your grades aren't private, making communications about them difficult. Again, since, in A, the letter grade of an A is considered the golden standard, lower grades often indicate a lack of learning. This can be a source of unhappiness and frustration, obviously, and presents a dilemma that students must reconcile. Students tend to measure success personally, making a focus on character and improvement a key for personal growth. I can connect this to a professor that I had during my master's degree program. His name was Dr. Larry Rivers at Florida A&M University. He was a very strict professor. He held high standards, and he simply did not accept less than your best effort in class during the research process. He was a history professor. I can tell you that in that research class, it was probably the most difficult course I'd ever taken in my life. And many students dropped out of that class, but he was adamant that the learning process, the genuine learning, was more important than what your letter grade was. I actually made a B in that class, but I felt like I learned more in that class than any other class I'd ever taken in college. And so I've applied that to my teaching methods in my professional career, which is the last point, is that when students can apply what they learn to their life, it becomes more meaningful than a grade. So again, I teach my students that, it's not often what your grade is that's important, but actually how can you make a connection to life? How can you make a connection to genuine learning? If you forget everything that I've taught you, but you can take away the skills, even if you make a B in the course, then you'll find yourself at a better sense of fulfillment in your learning and as a person going into life. How these findings extend research on teacher-student communication about grades. So these findings provide an empirical rationale for theorizing grades as a communicative dilemma. Although grades are used in the classroom as a rationale and quantifiable measure of learning, they should be managed through positive communication. These findings illustrate that students can draw upon positive discourses to understand grades and evaluate their success. It offers a new focus for teacher-student communication about grades, and teachers can draw upon positive discourses and move conversations about grades beyond distress and conflict. I made several connections to the textbook regarding this article. Number one, the type of research conducted, the qualitative methods here. The research relied primarily on the collection of non-numerical data through survey and interview results. Groups of college students involved in this study. So most of the data came from the interviews. This was done in a focus group method where discussions were led by a moderator in small groups to examine how they thought and felt about communication and grades. The types of variables present in this study: you had categorical variables, the role of interviewees, the undergraduate students, and the characteristics of the universities, the location, the demographics, academic profile, etc. Even though those were not actually revealed in the article, I'm almost certain that in the study it may have been, but again, due to ethical considerations, they may not have been. The independent variables present in the study: student perceptions about the value of grades versus learning, teacher response to conversation with students regarding grades, and the dependent variable was teacher-student conversations about grades. Definitions included in this article: inductive framework. This is an approach researchers use to make specific observations or measures. Patterns are then detected, allowing the researcher to formulate a hypothesis in order to make a general conclusion. So that is the inductive framework. Grounded theory, the methodology for developing theory dependent upon gathering and analyzing empirical data. Theory is based on concepts that are generated from data collected during the research study and not based only on prior reasoning. So again, you're analyzing data that's collected during the time of the study, and then you're developing your theory within that process. So in conclusion, I wanted to end with another quote. This is from Anthony Robbins, and it says, "To effectively communicate, we must realize that we are all different in the way we perceive the world and use this understanding as a guide to our communication with others." And I believe that this quote is applied in the manner that this study was conducted, then all will benefit from it. Teachers, professors, etc., will be able to move their conversations about grades in a more positive fashion. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the summary of my article.